I thought Saturday mornings were supposed to be peaceful. I was sitting in my backyard, coffee in hand, the sun glinting off the leaves, birds singing, thinking maybe, just maybe, the HOA had finally left me alone. For a second, I let myself imagine a world without passive-aggressive emails and endless, friendly reminders about lawn heights and mailbox colors. Then came the knock. It wasn't the usual polite neighborly knock, the kind that says, "Hey, want some sugar?" No, this was heavy, urgent, the kind of knock that sends a chill crawling down your spine before you even reach the door. My first thought, who in the world would be here this early on a Saturday? I opened the door and there they were. Two men in dark uniforms, badges glinting in the sunlight, faces serious, voices commanding. They called themselves officers, said they were there about HOA violations. I froze, because something about them didn't feel right. Their movements were stiff, almost rehearsed, like actors trying to convince a casting director they were real cops. But the problem wasn't just how they looked. It was the way they assumed authority, the way they demanded I step outside, as if my front door didn't exist. My mind raced. I've dealt with HOAKaren before. I've heard her ridiculous threats, her attempts to micromanage every square inch of the neighborhood. But this was a whole new level. This was audacious. This was terrifying. I tried to keep my voice steady, my sarcasm hiding the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Officers," I said, "can I see some identification?" They flashed badges, official-looking shiny, but something about them screamed fake. One badge had the wrong seal, another looked bent, cheap, and hastily printed. My stomach tightened. Whoever they weren't real cops, and yet they didn't seem scared, at least not at first. I decided to buy time. "I just need to check with the police department," I said, stalling, hoping my calm would throw them off. My hands were shaking slightly, but I tried not to let it show. They stepped closer, voices low, insistent. "You need to step outside." Every instinct in me screamed, "Do not." But I couldn't run. This was my home, my sanctuary, and they thought they could barge in because HOAKaren said so. That's when I heard the quiet shuffle behind me. My wife, she doesn't say much in moments like this, she doesn't need to. Her presence alone changes the energy in the room. Calm, confident, unshakable. I could feel it in the air, she's about to make the difference. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. My mind was a whirlwind. Are they really going to try to force me? Should I call the police? Could this end badly? And then she stepped into the frame just behind me, and suddenly the entire atmosphere shifted. One of the men blinked, the other shifted his weight nervously, and for the first time their confidence faltered. I knew in that exact moment that this wasn't going to be just another HOA battle. This was something else, something bigger, something dangerous. I glanced at my wife, trying not to panic, silently asking, "What now?" She just looked at the imposters with a calmness that made me question if they even realized who they were messing with. One of the men leaned slightly forward, trying to regain control. "You need to come outside," he said again, his voice quivering ever so slightly. I forced a smile. I laughed softly, more out of disbelief than humor. "You really think you can intimidate me in my own house?" My voice cracked just a little, betraying my fear, but I held my ground. The tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. I didn't know it yet, but this moment, this single knock on the door was going to change everything. Because sometimes it's not the threat itself that scares you. It's the uncertainty, the questions spinning in your head. Who are they? What do they want? What happens if I make the wrong move? And that's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with fake cops. I was about to face a full-blown HOA nightmare, the likes of which I never imagined. They're standing there, inches from the door, confidence slipping, and I can see in their eyes that they're hiding something. Something that's about to unravel, and I know my wife is the only one who can stop it. I could feel their eyes on me, two strangers who were supposed to exude authority but instead radiated something far more dangerous: desperation. They were too confident for amateurs, but too jittery to be real cops. Something about their posture, the way they shifted their weight, screamed imposters. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were trembling slightly. "Officers," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline buzzing in my veins. Can you tell me which department you're with? Badge numbers, names. One of them fumbled. His hand shook as he pointed to a shiny badge clipped to his chest, but the details didn't match anything real. I noticed it immediately. The emblem was wrong, the lettering sloppy. I wanted to laugh, but my gut warned me not to. The other one cleared his throat, trying to sound authoritative, but it came out more like a croak. We're here about HOA compliance. HOA compliance. My stomach sank. They actually thought this would work. They actually thought 2 fake cops could scare me into obedience. I glanced toward the window, my fingers instinctively tightening around my phone. I started recording, just in case. HOA compliance? I asked slowly, letting the word hang in the air. So you're threatening me in my own home because of a newsletter and a few emails. The first man stepped closer, trying to reclaim control. Sir, you need to step outside. It's standard procedure. I took a deep breath. I had to stall. I had to figure out what kind of game I was in. Step outside, I repeated, voice calm but low. So you're saying I should just leave my house and let strangers in because HOAKaren said so? Their confidence wavered, and I could see it. The first man's jaw tightened. He glanced at his partner, a silent question hanging between them, and I realized they hadn't planned beyond this moment. My wife moved slightly behind me, just far enough that I could see the corners of her eyes. She didn't say a word, but the air around her seemed to hum with authority. Even standing there silently, she was shifting the power balance. I tried another tactic, humor. You know, I've dealt with HOAKaren before, I said, letting my tone drip with sarcasm. And this is new, but it's not very convincing. They froze. Not from the sarcasm, but from the sudden realization that they were in way over their heads. Their fake bravado couldn't hide the sweat forming at their temples, the subtle tremor in their hands. I could almost hear their panic screaming behind their forced composure. Then came the first sign that things were about to spiral. One of them whispered, just barely audible, to the other, "Are you sure she's alone?" Alone? My wife hadn't even spoken. I could see the flicker of fear cross his face when he realized she was here. The calm, quiet, deadly presence that had just appeared behind me was all it would take. I kept talking, keeping my voice steady, lacing humor with tension. I guess HOAKaren didn't tell you that impersonating officers is illegal, I said. Their faces tightened. My heart pounded. I wasn't sure if it was adrenaline or the sheer thrill of watching them crumble. One of them shifted nervously, trying to regain control. Sir, we just were following orders, he stammered. The other nodded quickly, eyes darting, clearly uncomfortable. I swallowed hard, realizing this could end badly if I slipped. But there was no backing down. Not in my house. Not when these imposters thought fear could make me bend. Then my wife took a step forward, calm, deliberate, silent. I felt a shiver run through me, not fear, but certainty. This changes everything. The imposters glanced at each other, the first beads of panic forming in their eyes. I could see them calculating, do we flee? Do we bluff? I forced a laugh, low and dry. You know, I said, my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. I've watched enough cop shows to know a real officer doesn't act like this. Their bodies stiffened, their glances became more frantic. They were about to find out that the bluff they were relying on had just been called. One of them takes a hesitant step back. The other bites his lip. And then my wife, quietly, deliberately, reaches for something tucked in her jacket, something that would change everything in the next few seconds. Time seemed to slow. I watched the imposters, their confidence crumbling like sand slipping through fingers, and I realized they had no idea what was coming. My heart was hammering in my chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. I knew my wife was about to end this charade in a way they couldn't recover from. She stepped forward slowly, deliberately, calm as if she were entering a courtroom rather than our living room. My pulse raced. I knew that behind her quiet composure was something they could never have prepared for. The imposters shifted nervously, glancing at each other. Their eyes darted, seeking some kind of escape, some explanation, anything to save them from the authority standing silently before them. Then she pulled it out. a U.S. Marshal badge gleaming in the morning sunlight held between her fingers. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten. She just stood there and the room seemed to shrink around the three of them. I could almost hear the silence pressing in, the air thick with disbelief and fear. One of the impostors froze, his hand halfway to his belt. The other stammered, "What is that?" I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me, low and incredulous. "That's what you should have asked for from the beginning," I said. "An actual law enforcement officer, not whatever this is." The effect was immediate. The first man's face went pale. I could see his pulse racing in his neck. His mouth opened, trying to speak, but no words came. The second man looked like a deer caught in headlights, his fake confidence evaporating into thin air. My wife's calmness was lethal. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to move. That simple display of authority was enough. I watched the imposters' minds race, trying to calculate how fast they could flee without looking guilty. I couldn't resist narrating my inner thoughts. Wow, HOAKaren really underestimated us. These guys actually thought a couple of fake badges and some intimidation could make us comply. And now they're realizing they just walked into a trap. The first imposter finally muttered, "We were just following HOA orders." His voice cracked. The other nodded frantically, hands twitching at his sides. I stepped closer, holding my phone up like a witness, recording every second. "Following orders, you do realize impersonating law enforcement is illegal, right?" I asked calmly. "And now you're standing in front of a U.S. Marshal." Their eyes flicked to my wife. The panic in their gaze was unmistakable. I could practically see their thoughts: run, leave, don't make a scene. I felt a surge of satisfaction, but I had to stay in control. My voice remained calm, even teasing. "You've got options. Step away. Go home. Maybe next time, HOAKaren will hire people who actually know how to behave." The first man took an unsteady step back. The second mirrored him. Their movements were hesitant, awkward, desperate. I could see them realizing that any further attempt at intimidation would be disastrous. Then my wife did something small, almost imperceptible. She shifted her stance slightly, subtly signaling authority. And I swear at that moment I could see the decision forming in their minds: flee or face consequences. One whispered to the other, a voice barely audible, "Maybe we should just go." I let the words hang in the air. Their fear was palpable. Their arrogance had evaporated, and yet for some reason I didn't want to break the tension too quickly. I wanted to savor the moment, the exact moment when fake authority met real power. I glanced at my wife and smiled, quietly narrating my amazement. She doesn't even have to raise her voice. Two men who thought they could intimidate us are now paralyzed by her presence alone. And then, finally, it happened. The first imposter started retreating toward the driveway. The second followed, clumsily fumbling with a badge that had suddenly lost all meaning. I could hear the crunch of gravel under their shoes as they hurried to escape, glancing over their shoulders like criminals caught red-handed. I stepped back inside, my heart still racing, the adrenaline refusing to fade. I watched them disappear down the street, leaving a swirl of dust and humiliation behind them. But even as relief washed over me, a flicker of concern remained. HOAKaren wasn't done. She had orchestrated this fiasco, and I knew the emails, the threats, and the inevitable calls would be coming. I looked at my wife, still calm, still composed, and I realized we had survived the first wave, but the storm wasn't over. As I caught my breath and started walking back toward the kitchen, my phone buzzed. A new email from HOAKaren appeared in my inbox, subject line: "Urgent, security incident report." I stared at it, knowing in my gut that the next move would be just as dramatic and even more dangerous. I barely had time to catch my breath before my phone buzzed again. A new email from HOAKaren, of course. The subject line alone made my chest tighten. "Urgent, security incident report." I stared at it, fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend that the morning's chaos had ended. But I knew better. This was HOAKaren. She never let anything go. She never admitted defeat. And the words "security incident" in her hands could mean anything or nothing, but it was always enough to make your stomach sink. I opened it. The email was frantic, unhinged, and almost comically angry. Every line screamed self-importance. Every sentence was a thinly veiled threat. She described officers sent to investigate property violations and accused us of obstructing law enforcement. The absurdity hit me like a wave. 2 fake cops sent by HOAKaren, and somehow it's our fault. I read aloud, my voice shaky with disbelief and anger. We take the security of our neighborhood very seriously. Your behavior is unacceptable. Immediate compliance is required. I looked at my wife, who had been quietly observing the entire time, calm as ever. She raised an eyebrow, the corner of her lips curling slightly. It was a look that said, "They've lost their minds, but we're fine." I laughed, half out of relief and half out of frustration. "She really thinks 2 fake cops can intimidate us, huh?" I muttered. But even as the absurdity made me chuckle, a flicker of unease remained. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. There was something dangerous here. HOAKaren had shown she was willing to cross lines, and while the imposters had fled, this felt like a warning, the beginning of something bigger. I glanced out the window. The driveway was empty, but the tension lingered in the air. Every shadow, every creak of the house made me jump slightly. My adrenaline refused to settle. My mind raced with scenarios. What if she escalates further? What if someone else shows up? I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I processed the email. Then, almost as if on cue, my phone rang. A real officer. My pulse spiked. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Sir, this is Officer Daniels from the local precinct. We received reports of imposters posing as law enforcement at your residence. I understand your wife is a U.S. Marshal." I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. "Yes, that's correct." The officer's voice carried professionalism and seriousness. "Thank you for confirming. We just want to ensure your safety and document the incident. It seems the individuals have fled, but we need your statement for the report." I glanced at my wife, who was watching me with that calm, confident expression that always unnerves me in the best way. I could see the tension easing in her posture, but the storm wasn't over. After hanging up with the officer, I turned my attention back to the email. My inner thoughts were racing. HOAKaren has no idea what she's unleashed. She's arrogant, vindictive, and now publicly embarrassed. This isn't over, it's just beginning. I paced the living room, narrating my panic and disbelief. Every creak in the house sounded louder than usual. Every shadow seemed like a potential threat. The imposters had fled, yes, but the fear that HOAKaren could escalate further kept me on edge. Then came the next wave of suspense. Another email, shorter, sharper, almost venomous. "Immediate explanation required. Failure to respond will result in escalation." I felt my chest tighten. I knew she was trying to assert control, to intimidate, to make us bend to her will. But now, she had underestimated the wrong household. I looked at my wife. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me everything. Calm, collected, and ready, I knew in that instant that we had the upper hand, not through aggression, but through truth, authority, and presence. The tension hung thick in the air. The imposters were gone, the emails piled up, and yet the real confrontation hadn't even begun. The question was, how far would HOAKaren push this? And in that moment I realized, the storm wasn't just outside in the form of emails or fake cops. The storm was now a test of patience, wit, and nerves, and we were standing right in the eye of it, ready for whatever came next. Just as I prepared a measured response, my wife's phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. She glanced at it, and I could see the slightest flicker of concern cross her face. Whoever it was, they weren't a neighbor, and I had the sinking feeling that the next chapter would push all of us further than we'd ever imagined. The moment my wife glanced at that mysterious message, my stomach sank. I could feel the tension coil in the air like a live wire. Whoever had texted her wasn't a neighbor. The number wasn't local. And the words, well, words can carry power, and these carried a warning I could feel in my bones. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't answer immediately. She swiped the phone and showed me the message, brief, almost cryptic. "We know what happened this morning, be careful." My heart skipped, My pulse thundered in my ears. That's when the adrenaline fully kicked in. The fake cops weren't the only problem. This was bigger. Someone had been watching. Someone knew the chaos HOAKaren had caused, and they weren't pleased. I could feel my palms sweat as I glanced toward the driveway. Empty, silent, deceptively calm, but I knew better. Silence doesn't always mean safety. Then the emails started piling up again, from HOAKaren herself, every one more furious than the last. Immediate compliance required. Failure to cooperate will have consequences. Your continued defiance is unacceptable. I read them aloud, my voice shaky with disbelief, my mind racing. How could someone live in such a bubble of self-importance? Every line dripped with anger, humiliation, and a level of entitlement I couldn't even comprehend. And yet, somewhere beneath the anger, there was fear. I could feel it. She was rattled. We had shaken her perfect little world. My wife leaned against the counter, calm as ever, and whispered, "Don't respond yet. Let her stew. Let her see how powerless she really is." I nodded, though my nerves screamed at me to fire back, to defend, to fight. But she was right. Waiting, patience, observation, that's what real authority looks like. And right now, we had it. Hours passed. Each minute dragged by, tension coiling tighter. I kept glancing out the window, every shadow a potential threat, every car on the street a possibility. But nothing. Quiet, too quiet. Then in the late afternoon, another wave of emails came, this time more desperate, more frantic. Security breach. Unauthorized interference. Immediate explanation required before escalation to law enforcement. My jaw dropped. She was seriously threatening to involve real law enforcement over two fake imposters. The audacity was staggering. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. But just as I started narrating my disbelief, a knock came. Not at the door, at the gate. I froze. My eyes met my wife's. That calm, collected look again. She didn't panic, not for a second. And that steadied me. We crept to the window. Outside, a man in plain clothes was packing, glancing around nervously, a clipboard in hand. I immediately recognized him, not a real cop, but some kind of HOA representative sent to intimidate us further. My stomach twisted. They weren't done. They were testing us, pushing boundaries. I whispered to my wife, voice low, "They're back." Her eyes narrowed, calm, precise, deadly calm. "Let's see what they do when they realize they're in over their heads," she said. I knew she was right. The imposters had already fled. The threats, the emails, the messages, all empty until confronted with real authority. And she was that authority. I grabbed my phone, recording everything. Every twitch, every nervous glance, every word exchanged would be proof. And the proof mattered not for revenge, but for survival. The man at the gate shuffled awkwardly. "We're here about this morning's incident," HOAKaren said. I cut him off calmly, voice firm. "You need to leave. You are not law enforcement. You have no authority here. Step off my property." His face went pale. I could see the panic spreading across him like wildfire. He swallowed hard, glanced at the street, and then finally, muttering something about orders, turned and walked away. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me, but my heart was still pounding. This wasn't just about fake cops or emails. This was about intimidation, testing limits. And we had passed the test, barely. I turned to my wife, awe and gratitude mixing in my chest. She gave me a small smile, calm, reassuring. I realized then that the fight wasn't over. HOAKaren was far from finished, but for now, we had survived the storm. Just as I relaxed, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, a message. "You think you're safe? This is just the beginning." I looked at my wife, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes, a storm she hadn't revealed yet. Whatever came next, I knew it was going to be bigger, louder, and far more dangerous than anything we had faced this morning. The morning's chaos had barely settled when the next wave of tension hit. That message on my wife's phone, "You think you're safe? This is just the beginning," had set my nerves on fire. I could feel every instinct in my body screaming, "Something else is coming. Be ready." I glanced around the living room. The air was thick with silence, heavy and almost suffocating. My wife stood near the kitchen counter, calm, composed, her badge tucked safely in her jacket. I could see her eyes scanning every corner, assessing every potential threat. And in that moment I realized why she had always seemed untouchable. This wasn't bravado. This was real authority. Then the first signs of movement outside caught my attention. I looked through the window and saw them, the imposters. Not the same two from this morning, these were others, HOA hired security personnel, probably thinking they could intimidate us after the previous failure. But their confidence was already wavering. They hadn't prepared for this level of resistance. I stepped back, narrating to myself, trying to calm my rising pulse. "Here we go again," I muttered. "Round two." The men approached cautiously, clipboards in hand, badges glinting in the sunlight like props from a low-budget movie. I could see the hesitation in their steps, the way they glanced at each other nervously, trying to gauge whether this was worth pursuing. My wife stepped forward, badge visible, posture perfect, every inch the embodiment of authority. She didn't speak, didn't move aggressively, she didn't need to. The confidence radiating from her was enough to make the imposters falter. I narrate my thoughts as adrenaline courses through me. These guys really think fear can win over authority, but fear has nothing on truth, presence, and calm control. One of the men shuffled his feet, his attempt at intimidation collapsing under the weight of reality. He raised his hands slightly, a gesture that said, "I don't know what I'm doing here." The other muttered something under his breath, clearly panicking. I couldn't resist a dry laugh. "You all really thought you could come here again, after this morning?" I asked, voice calm but edged with incredulity. The effect was immediate. The imposters froze, eyes wide, glances flicking toward the street as if plotting their escape. And then the retreat began. The first man muttered, "Maybe we should go." His partner nodded frantically, stumbling backward as they tried to retreat without tripping over their own feet. I could see their humiliation written all over them, and I couldn't stop a grin from spreading across my face. I turned to my wife, admiration mixed with relief. She watched silently, allowing them the dignity of leaving without escalation. Every step they took away from our property reinforced the lesson. Real authority doesn't yell, it doesn't threaten. It simply exists, and they couldn't handle it. I grabbed my phone, recording every step. The footage would be proof of their incompetence, proof of the threats, proof of HOAKaren's overreach. More importantly, it was catharsis. Every stumble, every awkward retreat was a reminder that we were untouchable, at least for now. And yet, despite the immediate relief, I felt the tension lingering. This wasn't over. HOAKaren was calculating, vindictive, and humiliated. The emails would continue. The threats would escalate. And somewhere I knew she was already plotting her next move. I watched as the imposters disappeared down the street, glancing nervously over their shoulders. Their retreat was almost comical if it weren't so serious. But it was also proof that boldness without preparation, aggression without authority, always fails. I let out a long exhale, trying to calm the adrenaline that still pulsed through me. My wife turned to me calm, unwavering, and I realized something. We weren't just surviving this. We were winning, not through aggression or confrontation, but through presence, truth, and confidence. I settled back into the living room, narrating my disbelief, relief, and growing anticipation. The storm wasn't over, but we had cleared the first waves. The imposters were gone, humiliated, and exposed. HOAKaren had overreached, and now the consequences were waiting for her. Just as I leaned back, phone in hand, ready to document the aftermath, a knock came at the door. Not subtle, not hesitant, heavy, deliberate. And I knew immediately HOAKaren herself was coming. The knock on the door was different this time. Heavy, deliberate, not a hesitant knock, not the fake confidence of imposters. This was someone who believed they had power, who believed they could intimidate with presence alone. I froze for a split second, heart hammering. My pulse shot through my chest like lightning. I glanced at my wife, who didn't flinch. Her calm, unshakable demeanor was contagious, and I tried to mirror it. But inside, I felt the tension coiling tighter with every second. "Go ahead," she said quietly, almost under her breath. Her voice was steady, unwavering, a subtle signal that whatever came next, we were ready. I opened the door. There she stood, HOAKaren herself. Dressed in her usual sharp blazer and designer heels, her face twisted with fury, her eyes blazing with self-righteous indignation. She probably thought she could waltz in, command the situation, and assert her authority like she had done in every petty neighborhood dispute before. But she hadn't accounted for us. I could see her calculating, trying to gauge whether we were afraid. She stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. This morning's incident was unacceptable. I expect full compliance and apologies immediately. I let a small laugh escape me, disbelief coloring every word. You sent fake cops to my house, I said slowly. Do you really expect me to take that seriously? Her face flinched ever so slightly, but she masked it quickly. That is irrelevant, she snapped. Orders were given, you have no right to question them. I could feel the suspense thickening in the air, a palpable tension like electricity. Every word from her mouth was meant to intimidate, to corner us. And yet, she was standing in front of someone who could out-authority her in an instant. My wife stepped forward, badge visible, voice calm and unwavering. Excuse me, Karen, she said, tone measured but carrying the weight of real authority. Those individuals were impersonating law enforcement. Their actions were illegal, and this is my house. You've crossed a line. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. I could see the panic flicker in her eyes, buried beneath layers of anger and entitlement. She hadn't expected a real U.S. Marshal to be here, and she hadn't anticipated someone calling out her overreach so calmly. I felt a rush of emotion, relief, awe, adrenaline as Karen faltered. For the first time, I saw her not as a towering, untouchable authority in her little HOA kingdom, but as a human being caught in a lie, her control slipping. She tried to recover, pointing a finger at me. You will. Enough, my wife said, her voice low, sharp, commanding. The weight behind it was undeniable. Karen's finger froze midair. I could see the shock, the disbelief, and the sudden realization that she had lost. Completely. I narrated quietly to myself, trying to process the scene unfolding. 2 fake cops, a mountain of angry emails, threats, and intimidation, all undone in seconds by calm authority and truth. The look on her face says it all. She thought she could scare us, and now she's realizing she underestimated us in every way. Karen's posture stiffened. She opened her mouth again, probably to spit another threat, but the words faltered. She was trapped in her own arrogance. My wife didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to threaten. Her presence alone had shattered Karen's facade. I felt a surge of triumph, tempered with disbelief. After everything, the imposters, the emails, the messages, the fear, we had won. Without shouting, without anger, without giving in. Karen finally stepped back, mouth tight, eyes flicking around for some excuse, some way to reclaim authority. And when she found none, she turned sharply and stormed off, her heels clicking against the pavement, leaving a trail of fury and humiliation behind her. I exhaled deeply, my chest tight with adrenaline. The tension finally began to ebb. I turned to my wife, and she gave me that calm, reassuring smile that always reminded me, presence, patience, and truth are stronger than intimidation. I narrated, almost whispering to myself, and just like that, the storm had passed. The imposters were gone. The threats were neutralized. And HOAKaren, well, she had learned a lesson she wouldn't forget any time soon. Even as I settled back, my phone buzzed again. A small part of me tensed. But this time, the fear was gone. We had faced every challenge, every intimidation, and had come out on top. As I looked at the quiet street outside, I realized that victory wasn't just about surviving HOAKaren. It was about reclaiming peace, authority, and our home. But in the back of my mind, one thought lingered. What else will she try next? After HOAKaren stormed off, the quiet in our neighborhood was almost surreal. I leaned against the kitchen counter, coffee forgotten, heart still pounding from the morning chaos. I could hardly believe what had just happened. 2 fake cops, a series of threatening emails, mysterious messages, and then Karen herself, all undone by calm, authority, and a little bit of presence that couldn't be faked. I looked at my wife. She didn't need words. Her small, confident smile said everything. We won. This is over for now. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Every ounce of anxiety, every sleepless night wondering what HOAKaren would do next, began to fade. We had survived the storm, not through confrontation or yelling, but through patience, calm, and undeniable truth. I narrated quietly to myself, still in disbelief. You think you can intimidate someone with fake cops and threats? You think emails and messages can control a household? You haven't met my wife. And the humor in it all wasn't lost on me. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. Imagine this in a newsletter someday. Reminder to HOA members, don't impersonate law enforcement or you might meet a real U.S. Marshal. The thought was absurd, yet strangely satisfying. As the afternoon stretched into evening, I checked the driveway. No imposters, no suspicious figures, just the golden sunlight hitting the trees, birds chirping, and a quiet that finally felt like safety. The emails continued, but they were pointless now. Karen's threats, her accusations, her self-righteous rage, they all lacked teeth. She had overreached, and the proof of her audacity was documented in my phone, recordings, timestamps, and a badge that could never be faked. I turned to my wife and asked, almost jokingly, "So, did we just survive the craziest HOA conflict in history?" She laughed softly, a calm, knowing sound. "You could say that," she replied. But beneath the humor was a subtle seriousness, a lesson embedded in the experience. Authority is about presence, not threats. Calmness is stronger than intimidation, and truth will always outlast lies. I felt a rush of gratitude, not just for the outcome, but for the clarity the chaos had brought. For years, HOAKaren had tested my patience, pushed boundaries, and tried to make me bend to her will. But in one dramatic morning, with imposters, threats, and real authority at our side, it became clear. Control isn't given, it's asserted through truth and presence. As I narrated the final moments in my mind, I realized the deeper lesson. Life isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about facing it with the right tools, the right mindset, and when needed, the right person by your side. Someone who doesn't panic, does overreact, but acts with precision, calm, and authority that can't be faked. Later, I walked around the yard, reflecting on the events. Each step felt lighter, each breath calmer. The imposters were gone. HOAKaren had retreated in defeat, and we had reclaimed our home, our peace, and a sense of control that no email, message, or fake badge could take away. I sat back down, coffee in hand, and smiled. The absurdity of it all, the danger, the suspense, the fear, it was all part of the story we would tell, a story of chaos turned into triumph. I glanced at my wife one last time, her badge tucked safely away, her calm gaze meeting mine. I whispered almost to myself, "We did it. We survived. We won." And in that moment, the storm finally ended. The imposters, the threats, the intimidation, all nothing compared to the strength, calm, and truth standing on our side. HOAKaren had been taught a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Yet even as I smiled, a small part of me knew one thing: HOA conflicts never truly end. Emails, notices, and petty power plays will always exist. But we had learned something far more important. Courage, presence, and truth are stronger than fear. And as long as we remembered that, no storm, no matter how absurd, could ever break us. And with that, I finally allowed myself to relax, letting the sun wash over the yard, the peaceful silence around us a testament to the day's victory. For now, our home was ours again. And this time, the message was crystal clear. Do not mess with a household led by a U.S. Marshal. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.